Go ahead, thank you.
They're ready to go, or ready to leave.
I say no, I'm no longer.
It's time for our 11:30 meeting.
I don't know what we're gonna do.
We wait for the
but-
next 11:30.
Oh, thank you, no, thank you.
Uh, I'd like to call to order our ad hoc budget committee meeting of Wednesday, July 13th, 2022.
No, yeah, no.
Do we have
no.
roll call, please?
Ford,
Present.
If you said Gums, Gums is here.
Thumbs, thank you. Caius,
Caius present.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Sturgis,
Sure.
Tepe,
Up here.
Hirag,
Here.
Berman.
Berman's here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I don't know if we have minutes from June 3rd.
I don't think we have any minutes.
I didn't think we had minutes to approve. Public comments? I am not aware of any. Move on to our presentations. I think that one of the things we want to keep in mind is that we're talking about revenue and especially expenditures, that we have not, at this point in time, seen any department budgets. And we obviously won't get those for a period of time. So our discussions are just based on what information we have in front of us, based on our needs. So I think from the Finance Department, I don't, Joe, are you prepared to make any presentation to us other than what we've seen in the past?
No, I'm sorry. I think I don't know what happened. I did not realize that I was supposed to prepare a presentation for this morning. I understand there's the spreadsheet that Corinne had been working so hard on and compiling all the information, and then I had contributed some information and Jamie did as well. And then I worked with the final review and putting together some of those scenarios. That is the only information that I would be prepared to talk to you about. I'd be happy to walk you through it, to answer any questions you may have, whatever you think would be the most efficient way to get through it.
I think that we have some numbers that we obviously can work with. I'm sure there'll be questions as we go along.
Okay.
Excuse me for trying to eat at the same time.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Mr. Tim.
Joe, do you have, I'm going back to the presentation you made of the general fund forecast,
Yes.
which is up on the website. And I was looking at that and I was wondering if you were still felt comfortable with the numbers for sales tax revenue and for the other main revenue items in the general forecast that you put in?
Yes, I do. And I think probably the thing that might be missing, like to bridge to this morning's, or I guess afternoon's conversation, is what I prepared for last Wednesday. And then the resulting, rather than a projected deficit like for 2022 for this year, that we'd end up with excess revenue over expenditures. That was in comparison to our, I would say more like our original budget. So it had not yet taken into account all of the budget adjustments that have taken place like since March, basically. And that is what brings us down to where we then used up that excess revenue and then started dipping into the reserves in order to accomplish all those additional expenses that were approved since March approximately. So
As I recall, that excess revenue was about 10 million. And it was
That-
primarily due to sales tax increase.
yes, that's true.
Okay,
And income tax as well, and personal property. It was those three combined, but mostly like 6 million of it was sales tax.
and you're saying that was, trying to think of the right word to do, but that ended up being adjusted by the increases that we had in budgeted items.
Yes, that
calendar year.
excess revenue was tapped into in order to approve all of the additional expenditures that we've approved since March, and which is what maybe if we kind of just to kind of orient you to the presentation or the spreadsheet that was prepared for you and distributed, that first page of FY 2023 expenses, these were additional expenses that are projected relating to the Safety Act additional positions for the county for code enforcement, county administrator, state's attorney, process service, and it projects out the expenses for FY23. And then there's also included in there an estimate of equity staff pay raises, an estimate of step increases, and then an estimate of the COLA at 4% for employees. So basically, these are the additional expenses that we can project forward into FY23 to add to what we already have. And then the next page, and I'm just going through quickly just to orient you, and then we can go back and talk about anything you'd like to talk about. The next page is for FY24. So it takes all those same expenses and then builds in if there's additional employees being added for the Safety Act. It factors in their additional COLA increases, and it factors in what the projected rates are for FICA, IMRF, health insurance. So there's like an 8.5% increase in health insurance projected just based on the trend rate for Blue Cross Blue Shield. So those are the types of things that are factored in there. Then in the next page would be FY25 expenses. So it's the same expenses. There may be a few more employees for Safety Act added to the total. And then you have just in general, all of those expenses are increasing according to the COLA for that year. And then you have the projected revenue shortfall. So I just at the top line, I have the general fund revenue. That's where we're starting. And then that's the next line is the general fund excess revenue or revenue shortfall. And these are the numbers that kind of correlate to what I presented to you at the executive committee. So that's about $2.5 million excess revenue in total for FY 2022. And now if you take where we left off in March and then add in all the additional expenditures since March, that takes you down to the projected operating revenue shortfall for this year. So there would be about $750,000 shortfall in FY22, a $15 million shortfall in FY23, $25 million shortfall in FY24, and a $35 million shortfall in FY25. So that's how we got down to those numbers. And then after that, I have various scenarios which I kind of project out to you. What will it look like if we do increase the property tax? What does it look like if we do have approval by the public of a sales tax increase? The amount of additional revenues generated by those, which then you have the updated deficits after factoring that in. And so there's about 8 different scenarios, and I put them in the order of generating the most revenue. So you have that at the top, or what I should say also is that that's what results in the least amount of deficit. And so I put them in order that way. So we can go back and talk about anything you'd like to talk about in more detail, but I just wanted to kind of give you a kind of layout of how this is laid out and the logic behind it.
Mr. Chairman, Leonard, could I ask a question, please?
Yes, Mr. Leonard.
Yes, thank you. Joe, I had a question for you, and I think Mr. Tepe had asked part of the question and maybe got most of the answer, but I wanted to verify. Our fiscal year 21, the audit generated a $17 million surplus. I think $6 million was expenses and $11 million was additional revenue. And I believe we took that money to pay back COVID for the monies we had borrowed for that year. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by paid back COVID.
I thought we put some of the money back into reserves that we had borrowed from COVID.
Oh,
for
yes.
21, yes.
Yes, a portion of it did go back into the payroll reimbursement, the COVID payroll reimbursement fund, a portion of it, and that's related to the
Yeah,
budgetary
property
savings.
tax freeze.
Yes.
Right.
And then we put some
Yeah,
in
I
the
read-
property tax. Yes, that's what we did.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Now, my question is, I'm not concerned about the 6 million in expenses that we were under in 21, but the $11 million. When we did our 22 budget, we didn't know that we had an $11 million surplus in revenue coming in 21. So that was not included in the 22 budget.
That's right.
Right.
Why is that not being added into, say, the 23 budget or the 24 or the 25 budget?
It is being added, and how it's being added is that in 2022, if you start there, we had used roughly about $10.5 million of our reserves. And so we're saying, okay, now we're not going to use those reserves, but instead just use the revenue, the surplus revenue that you referred to, instead of the reserves. So then we take those reserves and put that back into our reserve balance. And let's see, I think it's at the end of your presentation, but there is a little box that gives you the total. Where is it? It's about $28 million of reserves that we'll have after you add that back in. So that is what is available to then use
Yes.
going forward. So what I
Right.
did was, so I'm not factoring in the use of any of that. I'm just showing you in these projections what it is with just pure revenue coming in and where the deficits result.
Sure. And I understand that, Joe, and I appreciate it. I guess my question is, on the one page where you show the projected revenue shortfall for 22, 23, 24, 25 in the total, the revenue's at 105 million for 22. That was the amount that was originally projected in our budget for 22. Is that correct? Before the audit?
I know what you're asking. It's not exactly, it's $2.5 million more. And
Okay.
that 105,000, that's the projected revenue after it having been updated with, the additional sales tax, income tax, personal property replacement tax. And then there's many other adjustments to the general fund revenue, both up and down. For example, circuit clerk revenue, not circuit court, but court revenue is down by, I think, 700,000 is what's actually in this forecast. So that's all factored in here, both the increases and the decreases, which gives you that 105,000. And then that next line tells you, in comparison to our expenses as of March, we're left with a $2.5 million surplus. And then if you add all the, or I should say, subtract the expenses since March, that's at almost $3.3 million of additional expenditures. So that's how you end up with, at this point in the year, a projected deficit of 750,000. And by deficit, I'm saying that's how much of the reserve we would need to use. It's really.
Yes, and I get that and I understand it. Just one or two points and then I'll get off, because unfortunately I've got a 1 o'clock meeting I have to go to, but the amount of money that we have allocated for the Safety Act, for the added personnel, I've been talking to a few departments in judicial and public safety, and they feel like those numbers might be inflated some. And my thought is, I think maybe we need to talk to them once again about where we are with that before we come up with a budget determination for next year and 24 and 25, because I think there might be as much as a $2 million savings under the Safety Act mandates that we could appreciate if we got agreement from the judicial partners on that. I think also too, with say the 28 million that we have in ARPA money, You know, I do think we have the ability to, and then additional revenue that's going to be coming in, whether it be sales tax or personal property tax or state income tax or whatever. You know, I do think that we do have the ability to balance our budget for the next year or two at least. And I guess that's the only comment I wanted to make. So I thank you for your help. And what we'll do is we'll just maybe need to talk to the judicial partners too, and maybe reevaluate this a little bit if we could. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other,
May I make some additional comments, Mr. Chair? Jeppy here. On the first page that we've been presented in this spreadsheet, we have the numbers associated with the Safety Act from all of the individual affected departmental areas. In addition to that, there's a figure of $1,878,000 for capital expense. Okay. That's an adjustment by Mr. Feinstock. Mr. Feinstock adjusted that number down a bit based upon the numbers he was using, and I think he used a number of about $30,000 a person associated with that. So that number is down a bit from what originally had been presented to us, but it's a number that he shared with me that he was much more comfortable with. Okay, so we still have a tremendous initial expense for the first year that has to be dealt with. If you go down in the line items below that, there's 3 additional people for code enforcement, which I personally feel that they will justify themselves with additional billings and additional enforcement that has been lax. But I'm personally against a county administrator and the obvious assistant for the county administrator. So I will be arguing against that very strenuously whenever that one comes up. But the other items I feel are necessarily there. We've got the equity staff pay raises, which have been adjusted to occur over a 3-year time period in total. The step increases that are associated with the corrections, the deputies and the court personnel happen to us every year. And then associated with inflation, we've got a 4% cost of living increase for our non-union personnel in here. And that number carries on for both 24 and 25. So I think the numbers are not necessarily inflated. They're really based upon what had been requested by all of the members of what they're calling the justice partners and other items. So I'm in agreement with all but the county administrator and assistant numbers associated with that. So it's obvious to me that we're going to need additional revenue, and we need to find out and what our suggestion is going to be to the board to consider to do that.
very good. Mr. Sturgis.
Thank you, sir. Vern, I think there's been lots of conversation out there. Hello, is this better?
Yeah.
I think there's been conversations going on regarding the number of employees that the justice side might need in terms of the Safety Act. And I've heard wild numbers, but let's just say 61 wasn't the number. Let's say it was 41. I'm confused in that, are we saying 61's not the ultimate number, or it is the ultimate number? And the phasing of going from 19 people this year to 45 people in the second year to 61 people in the third year, is that acceptable? And it might not be your question, Is that acceptable, or are we saying that the 61 isn't, and that everything should be backed down accordingly through that? And I don't know the answer to that. So I don't know that that's fair to look to Vern. I'm just saying,
Let me share with you my logic, if I may, Tepe again. They asked for a total of 103 people over 3 years. So it's, like 49 people the first year, and the third year it totals up to 103. Okay. My point is that I hope they need a lot less than that. All right. And maybe they will. But regardless, if they only need half of what they're asking for, it still puts a tremendous strain on the budget, and it cascades down or cascades forward to 24 and 25 and beyond. So the logic is, in my mind, that we need to find some additional revenue in order to pay for it. And that's the part that I think it's up to this committee to decide and suggest.
understood. And
So I don't want to defend the numbers from them. I just want to share my logic that even it's half, it's still a
totally
tremendous.
get it. I've listened to you, I've listened to Bill, and maybe there's something in the middle a little bit, but I'm trying to make some of that jive to the best of my ability. And then, Joe, I'm also looking at some of this saying, in terms of the 8 options that were made available, I don't know that I don't know that I can articulate which one of those would need to be a referendum type item versus which of those may already be under our control. And I'm hoping that you can help me identify that a bit, unless it's already on there and I just don't see it.
No, not in those words, but anything that's labeled a property tax increase that is within the PTEL limits of 5%, so that we can certainly do with board approval. But the sales tax increase, whether it's the 0.5% or 1/4%, that would require a referendum and approval by the county residents.
Okay, so across the board, property tax up to a limit is within our control.
Yes.
Sales tax, we would need to go ask.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you so much.
And
Mr.
any
Chair,
leanings on
Gums.
your side?
Pardon me?
Mr. Chairman,
Any leanings on your side?
it's me, Corinne.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because of the cost that I saw after spreadsheet was all put together, I did a little exercise, and Cliff, you may want to know this. It was just an exercise. How do we bring this budget down? And this was in light of what Mr. Leonard did research independently. So I brought it down to a quarter. This is a quarter of what the public safety partners asked for of employees. That brought total costs down by only $10 million. We're still in deficit, even with $10 million reduction of a quarter of the ask. It was an exercise, Ms. Barrio, just so I can play with numbers a little bit to see where we are. We're still in arrears.
Mr. Chair Gums.
Yes.
Thank you. As it pertains to our judicial, I'm air quoting, partners and their requests, it is completely relevant that we accept the fact that these are statutory issues that they must handle. And I don't know what kind of leeway they have or how they're going to get their work done without what they're requesting. I mean, hopefully it'll be less, but at some level, even if we cut it in half, like Mr. Tepe says, they are statutorily required to get this work done. So we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to be creative and all those things. But this is kind of an ugly picture, and unfortunately part of our job.
Mr. Chairman Surges?
Yes, sir.
Michelle, I just want to make sure that I wholeheartedly go on the record on this, that I think that this is a terrible piece of legislation that I'm very much hoping within the first year that it's out there, everybody gets behind this and gets this streamlined a bit. I think I understand the impetus of where it was going, but it's the pendulum swung just way too far to the other area. And it became an unfunded monster that, I mean, this is going on across the state. And when the law enforcement professionals are all saying, we don't know that this is a good thing, I'm just hoping that there's some common sense that comes across and, you know, this gets dialed back significantly.
Fair.
I agree.
I'll go on the record to say that I would never have voted for this, but there are good things in there, and
Truly are.
yeah,
Yes.
for sure. But frankly, I mean, look where we
Not in
are.
its- Not in its totality, though. Yes.
Right, look where we are. So
So what, if I may, what do you, all right, so no one's arguing with what both Ms. Gums and Mr. Sturgis just said. But we have to deal with the facts that we've been given. And I caution all of us to assume that the state is going to be able to make the appropriate adjustments that many of the counties are going to be feeling the weight of this within a shorter period of time. If we pass, the purpose of this committee is to bring forward to the Finance Committee and then, of course, to the board for their approval, whether or not you'd like to pass ask the voters for a countywide mercantile sales tax. That sales tax, we've kept it at a very minimum rate at 1/4 or 1/2 percentage point. It can go up to 1.125%. So it is scalable. Once asked, we'd have to go back to the voters again to ask for an increase. So I think it's very prudent if you decide to move forward with this, you have an appropriate number that will assist with the balancing of the budget. And then that, if it's passed, that number will stay in perpetuity. It grow, shrink, depending on sales, on revenue. The property tax, as we know, has not been increased in approximately 10 years. It has remained flat. It is one of the lowest rates in our per government entity in our tax bill. I think it's 2.93%. We're actually getting towards the general fund. The rest of it, the remaining up to 4%, goes into our pension fund. So we have very modest amount for the property tax that we've asked for our residents to supply. I know it's property tax, everyone grumps about it, but Kane County has taken very good care of its taxpayers for 10 years. And unfortunately, the county has not been able to keep up with the expenses. We have not yet gotten the budget proposals that are going to be coming forward from all of our department heads that was already mentioned. I am concerned. I think we're all very much concerned about what commodities are going to be costing. We have to pay the same amount for gasoline as the county does as we do individually. We just heard from Mr. Fonstock that our cost for natural gas has spiked, and we saw that graph as well yesterday, by 200%. We don't know when that number is going to be going down. We have old buildings that are not, at least on this campus, not energy efficient. So these are all concerns that we should be aware of as we're going through the analysis of whether or not you feel it would be appropriate to go to referendum and ask the taxpayers to decide if they would like to contribute 1/4% towards public safety.
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yes.
Sturgis. Corinne, is on the notion of going to the voters for a sales tax, is the deadline, since we're in an election year this year, if we don't do it now, is it a 2-year wait till the next cycle? Or is that something that how does that work?
So it's every election. So then if it's chosen not to do it for the midterm, the gubernatorial election here, the next one can possibly, if so chose. I think the municipal elections, which usually has very low turnout, occur in March. I think it's in March or April of next year. And then the next election cycle will be the primary in November of next year.
Okay, so,
Or the presidential election the following year.
okay, so I guess my point is, there's other opportunities. Because to some large degree, I feel like there's a rock hanging over my head waiting to fall. And I don't know that I'm capable of making that decision right now in its totality. And one of the pressures might be the relief valve of saying, if you don't do it now, you can do it in the spring, or you can do it in the fall, yet you don't have to wait a full 2-year cycle to do it. And so that helps me personally. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I reply to that? Okay, Tep again. Let me take that rope hanging that rock over your head and slice into the rope that's holding it. Here's another part of the challenge, and believe me, I hate raising taxes or talk about raising taxes, and I got a hell of a lot of emails and last year when I did. But here's kind of the reality of it. If we go the 5% property tax increase, for example, which we would have to say yes or no to very shortly, okay? We will not see any of that revenue until 2024.
Right.
Okay? So regardless, any monies we'd hope to get out of that, we're going to have to use reserves in order to fund this for 2023. On the sales property tax, we have roughly a month.
It has to be approved at the August board meeting, which is
Yeah,
August
we have
9th.
up until the August board meeting to approve it, to put it on the November ballot, okay? And if it goes on the November ballot, we would begin collecting that July 1 of 2023.
Okay.
So we'd get
So
half a
lag time
year.
is much shorter on the sales tax
Well,
versus.
but
the
if we,
property tax.
if we delay it to put it on the 2023 election cycle, then that sales tax would not begin until January 1 of 2024.
Is that correct?
Okay, so,
No, there's a correction. on
am I
that.
correct?
Just regarding the property tax, I did want to make a correction. If the board were to approve an increase in property tax revenue by November, it would go into effect actually, it would start being collected in 2023.
2023, okay.
Going to 20
And that we have to do by July. If we delay anything later, then it would be 2024 before it could affect. So I've used the phrase in the past, and I'm getting very well known for it, of kicking the can down the road. Unfortunately, we've got to look into some reality and look at not kicking the can down the road, but dealing with it like now. And
Understood.
then if it gets voted down, or if we're unable to do the sales tax revenue and it doesn't pass, we're going to have to do some major challenges with the budget, because we're not going to be able to do everything. And we're going to have to really pare back.
If I may, sir, if you could look, everyone, at scenario number 6 on your spreadsheet, that plays out exactly what both of you have been referencing, with no countywide sales tax, with a 5% property tax increase. So that's scenario number 6. So I know Mr. Leonard was asking about this. If you take a look at the bottom of that page, it says available reserves. So take a look at the available reserves, and we have $28 million in reserves right now. So we could afford that. But then our reserves get cut in half, which the numbers we have now, because we only can work with the numbers we currently have. But if you then take a look at going on to 24, you'll see that we don't have that. We'd have to take out that remaining $14 million in reserves, if all things being equal. And we're still down now deficit by $7 million. Meanwhile, we've got these employees who are coming in. And then just multiply that if that goes out.
Remember now, we have not seen the budget request by the departments for next year. So that's going to be, obviously, it's not going to be less than it was last year.
You don't think they're going to go down?
No, but we've hired people and we paid for part of this year and we're going to have to budget for them next year and all the other different things that are the price of gasoline or the price of gas and electricity and.
I pointed out yesterday in our board meeting that yesterday we approved the addition of 7 people in the 7 additional people in the state's attorney's office, which I think is well merited. But that's another $700,000 and it'll be in the budget for 2023.
And then that's without benefits.
Mr. Chairman, Ford, so that myself and even the public or whoever else got to take a look at this outside of us to get an understanding what we're looking at, that these are salaries and personnel. So this goes towards our general budget. I guess the question that's going to be out there is that if there's fees that are attached to some of this stuff, how much does that generate? And is there other options with that funds that are being generated through that?
I'm not following you, Ron. I'm sorry.
So let's take, for instance, something simple like code enforcement. And there's fees that people have to pay and charges through some of this code enforcement. What do that number looks like?
I was under the assumption on that was a no.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Deputy. Actually, it's worse because according to the clerk's office, they feel that they will be receiving $500,000 a year less in revenues due to the bond changes. So
And I understand that. That's what I'm trying to say. is
it's
that-
even, that's even worse.
No,
So
no.
it's not that there's going to be additional
No,
fees.
no,
It's going to be a
and-
reduction.
No, I agree with you. And I'm just saying that just so that the public understands that's not funds out there that we can use. We need to present that and let them know that's because that's what people is gonna think about out in the public. That all, this gets charged, that gets charged, as that those of you and fees for different things. So somewhere along the line, it might be a good idea to show that side of it. And the reason why we gotta look at other options.
Understand your point.
Yeah.
Can, Mr. Onset, can you put together that report, or are those numbers already included in this budget?
The numbers of the reduction in the court fees or?
Or I believe just all fees for building permits, liquor
All of that
licenses,
is
all of that.
included in the starting point, so an updated forecast as of when we asked all the departments and elected officials to provide an update, that was back in March. So all of those updates as of March are included in this forecast. So if there's more recent updates, those are not yet in here.
Okay.
And I don't, Mark, want me upside the head here if I go astray, but my understanding, at least on that one specific for the 3 code enforcement officers was, Ron, was that we weren't going to be actually generating more fee, but the ancillary positive part of that is that we would greatly reduce some of the workload from the already burdened state's attorney's office, and allow the process to work the way it's supposed to, Because right now it's really bottlenecked by not having these people here. Am I remotely close on that?
Yes, you're very close on that. It'd be a more efficient process. There is revenues that are generated by the fees and fines for folks who don't come into compliance. So there's also fees that are generated by people who do come into compliance by getting the appropriate permits or rezoning fees. So it didn't actually, as a result of increasing zoning and building and water resource, stormwater fees that would otherwise not be captured if not for the enforcement proceedings to get them into compliance. And also the, as you mentioned, the savings on multiple departments and directors working with the state's attorney's office, where this property code enforcement person could alleviate that load by taking on short circuiting the need for a lot of those.
I mean, and my other comment on this, and believe me, I am not the guy that likes to add stuff to anything. But my immediate comment when Mark brought this to me was, who's doing this job now and how do we not have this person? Are you kidding me? So I have to be behind at least this portion of this wholeheartedly, saying we have a system that's missing a cog that doesn't work and we need to put that in. And ultimately, with so many other things, I don't believe this will actually prove to be a burden financially. I think it will be a null, but I don't know how we would ever, turning to Joe and saying, hi, can you prove up on that? There's no way you could ever prove up on that. But I really believe in my heart, this is one of those things where you spend $1 and you save 3
So,
situations. So,
but,
And do a better job.
and do a better job,
but
correct?
if we're simply talking about fees right now, and there's a cost for the employees, and that cost is going to go up every year, as it should. But will it generate, and I'm not being sarcastic right now, next year, we're proposing to have a budget shortfall of $15 million. Where those additional fees would come in, and it's not going to come at $15 million. It's going to come in maybe at less than $1 million for all the additional fees that we may be collecting with the additional hires for code
Lucky to
enforcement.
pay for the guys that we're hiring.
I didn't think it'd reach that.
How many, I mean, what are your estimate of fees that can be captured that are not currently being captured?
Not 15 million.
Good answer.
In terms of looking at justifying a property code enforcement unit to pay for the cost of that unit, that I think could easily be proved out with additional, the positive fees that are captured by them coming in compliance by getting permits and rezoning and that type of thing, and savings. And then if they do drag out the enforcement, any fines and penalties for that. But I wouldn't necessarily count on it being a revenue positive activity that would contribute towards other parts of a budget shortfall.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. So it'll be neutral.
For the property code enforcement.
Mhm,
I mean,
correct.
currently, our building permit, zoning, stormwater fees are all revenue positive. They're actually contributing more than it costs the county to run those programs.
Okay.
And that should increase with better enforcement.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Ford?
It answered my question. I kind of knew the answer to the question. What I'm saying is, do we have the sheet aside this that proves that to the public what we're looking at? Because I believe that's going to be a big question coming from the public side when we come talking about raising the taxes. Where's the other fees? What are those numbers and where are they going to? And how they play a part of this?
Mr. Onset, could you put that together for us?
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a sales job.
Exactly.
Really explain it.
So you're speaking of just the code enforce,
I think all fees, right?
All fees.
but all fees from these additional Safety Act employees, or?
That was just an example, using code enforcement because it was easier to talk about. I don't know much about the state's attorney's office or the clerk's office
I think we're
Marriage
saying it's a reduction
licenses.
in fees.
Are you looking at
By the
marriage
Safety Act.
licenses as well? And
I just think we're gonna need the information to sell this.
birth
That's my point.
certificates?
So are you, I guess I'm not clear on what you're expecting. So you're expecting to see a report to show how the fee revenue is changing, like line item by line item? I already have that. I can give that to you.
Okay, that's,
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I'm asking.
That's the
for.
detail behind these total figures.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Yes, please.
Ms. Dronczyk, the general fund forecast that you did a week or two ago,
Yes.
is that what you're referring to? Those would be the detailed line items that would have to be looked at?
I don't recall that I provided you with that detail at the meeting, but I do have it and I'd be happy to provide you the detail.
Yeah, it's up on the website, so,
Huh.
under this department.
Okay.
So, yeah, Mr. Ford, I think that's the list of what you were talking about. It's up under the previous notes from last meeting. And it's very detailed.
And I don't even remember having that out there, but that's great if it is. What I would give you.
Okay, so could we get that for next week as well?
Yes.
It's the documentation that he used to back up the forecast for the general fund.
Okay. That
Revenue.
sounds right.
Great job, Joe.
Mr. Chair Gums.
Yes.
I just to Mr. Ford's point, we've all had conversations about this subject, and oddly enough, yesterday afternoon, I had a great conversation with another board member, and the topic was, we kind of don't really bat an eye when we're raising the taxes at the forest preserve level. And then when we come to the county level, it's a whole nother conversation. And my question was, why is that so? And why is it easier to do those things from our positions? And the response was, well, the public, they have a love affair with the forest preserve to some degree because they get to see it, see it all and feel it all and look at it all, and it's beautiful and wonderful. And but it's tangible to them. What we do here, I think nobody ever loves what we do here. So the sale is a little bit deceiving in that word. However, it's true. But it's transparency. I think that's really what matters to the public when we tell them the position that we're in. They want to see what it is that we're doing with it. I think maybe that goes to Mr. Ford's point a little bit better.
I would say it does. I thank you. For
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say it does.
Ms. Gums, one of the difference between the Forest Preserve and the county board, it was presented to the entire board for the Forest Preserve to increase it. It's never been presented to the entire board, county board, for increasing that, to the best of my knowledge. So, we talk about it, but we've never made that presentation to the county board saying, our budget requires this to make it happen. So that's the difference between the two. Mr.
Michelle,
President.
Cliff Surges here. I have a different opinion of this, or a different perspective on this. From the Forest Preserve District, we went to the public via referendum and asked them what they wanted, not once, but twice, if not more than that. And the public resoundingly said, yes, go to referendum. We will give you the money to purchase the land because that's the type of community we want to live in. The recent increase has been based on the realization that we don't have the manpower to continue to service the land that we purchased via referendum. And I think the notion that we went to them first and asked them, and they said yes, and then increasing the taxes to manage what we had purchased I think that's a different scenario than we have here at the county board level. And that's why I'm wholeheartedly supported to going to referendum for the sales tax portion. And we could lay this out just as much as you want to. These are the services that we have countywide. We have a state's attorney's office that's second to none. We have a road commission that's second to none. We have a sheriff that's second to none. We have the only coroner for the entire county. I mean, there's a lot of things that the general public just doesn't realize that we do. And I think that, whether you want to call it transparency, salesmanship, whatever, I think that we need to remind the public that this is where we're at. And if this is what you want, then without a reduction in services, we're asking for a new sales tax to be layered on. And I think that's absolutely appropriate. And I think that people are going to be just as responsive as they were to the Forest Preserve District, but we have to be cards up and letting them know. We didn't bring the Safety Act. It came to us. But if we want to implement it the way we think it needs to be, then we have to present those facts up front. And it's a heavy lift. This isn't a joke. This is big numbers. So I don't know if that helps at all.
No, I appreciate that. I understand it. And, I think we've all been dancing around this conversation for a very long time now. But oddly enough, I think we all are on the same page at some level. We know something has to be done. Now, going to the public and explaining to the public is a fantastic idea, but we have yet to do that here. So I appreciate the.
I think, Dale, is what we're asking, are you looking for us to be able to say from this committee to finance, option 1 is this, option 2 is that, option 3 is both of those? Are you looking for consensus to move that forward?
Yes.
And I don't know that I'm ready to give that today.
No.
In any way, shape or form, but the numbers are continually overwhelming. I don't think that there's any question that there's a cliff that we're about to fall off of. The question is, are we a mile away from that, or are we 10 feet away from that? And what really needs to be done? And in the reality, can we get this Safety Act modified? And even if it was cut in half, if the ask was cut in half, would we be in a position to not raise? And I don't think that's the reality at all. I think we're going to need to do something. So which one of those 3 are the options?
I think Vern can address
Mis-
that.
Mr. Chair, I'm in agreement with
Go ahead and say it. Go ahead.
almost everything that you said. Okay, in that I don't think we're ready to make a decision yet. Okay, I think we're moving there, and I think we should come up with one recommendation, not 2 or 3. I think and then we need to disband ourselves and throw this back to the Finance Committee. But I don't think we can do any projections about what might happen to the Safety Act. I think we got to work on the numbers that are in front of us and, let it sink in. I mean, I worked on these a lot, and I'm not ready to say do this yet because I'm not firm, but I'm getting close. And I would hope that in the next meeting, we would be able to do that.
Mr. Chairman Ford,
Ford.
my point is whether it's property tax raise, sales tax raised, or both. One is how we gonna sell this. If that's the direction people want to go in. The one thing about the Forest Preserve is not just how we went to the public first, is also what took place to try to sell it along with it. And with the with the Safety Act, we probably don't stand a chance. But I do believe we should put forth the effort just on the side of representing our people in Kane County. I don't think there's nothing wrong with us making some type of attempt to show that we put forth the effort towards that.
Chair, you had a.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be a little bit pragmatic because it truly will be up to this committee to make the recommendation. And I appreciate your careful thought on all of this because this is tough for many of you. It's tough for all of us. But if we are, Mr. Leonard mentioned that the public safety partners had volunteered to reduce their ask. So I did my exercise just as an exercise, reducing the ask by 3/4. And I shared with you that's a $10 million savings. If it's 50% reduction, then we know it's a $5 million savings. But we need to go back and we need to do this quickly. So if I could ask Ms. Labrillo, if you have a moment of time, which I know you don't, to go back to all of our judicial partners and ask them to reflect on what their personnel requests are and get those to us. What is today, Wednesday? Perhaps, and our next meeting is next Wednesday. So perhaps they can get that to us so we can do some calculations by Friday. So at least they have another weekend, just in case they're a little late, to get it to us by Monday so that we can take a little bit of time and just recalculate. I mean, I've got my spreadsheet. I can just put in different numbers.
Yes, this may help with as you consider your options, but if you were to focus on the scenario page, what I think this tries to do for you is lay out exactly what your options are and what the impact of those options would be. So that very first one is we would have a property tax, and I'm sorry, I don't know if your printouts show the years at the top of the column, but that first column is FY22, the second column is FY23, the third column is FY24, the fourth column is FY25.
Joe, these packets are such that you would
You-
lay those on top of each other.
Okay,
correct?
you can see it. I mean, yes. So, but I just want you to know that, so those are, it's FY22 through FY25 and then a total column. So that very first scenario, it's showing you what it would look like if the board were to approve a 5% property tax increase each year starting for FY23. So that means starting by this November. And it would also show you what would happen if the public approved of 0.5% sales tax increase beginning for next year. So that is like the most revenue that could possibly come in with those two options. And even then, we start to show a shortfall in FY25 where it's showing that our expenses are outpacing the revenues coming in. And so it's, unless we do further projections going out further into the years, that's questionable whether even that is going to be viable in the long term, but it's possible. It's within the, it's within the realm of possibility. And then if you go down to scenario number 7, that would be the one I think Mr. Leonard had suggested, where he thought maybe we had enough in reserves to cover FY23 and FY24. So there's nothing there, without raising property tax, without raising sales tax. But that you end up with a deficit of almost $44 million, which far exceeds what we have of the $28 million in reserves. So there would not even be enough reserves to cover those deficits. And then the first year that you can possibly do an increase in property tax revenue and sales tax revenue, you still end up with a deficit of another 22 million. And there's no way at that point, if you just start adding tax at that point, that we're going to pull out of that hole without having some other additional revenue added. So of course, the best scenario is to raise both property tax and sales tax for FY23. And then after that, it becomes increasingly less viable or not viable at all because the total deficit far exceeds what our reserves would be. And then the deficit in the later years becomes so great that there's not enough of a property tax or sales tax increase that would cover those if you wait. Because part of it is this, if you start with the property tax increase in 2023, that's cumulative. So you had 5% in 2023, and then another 5% in 24, and another 5% in 25. And by waiting, you lose that. And so instead of being up to the $7.8 million range in FY '25, if you wait, you're only at $2.5 million. So you've just lost $5 million of annual revenue by waiting. And I'm not trying to advocate for these tax increases. I'm just trying to make sure you understand the difference between the scenarios. And if you really do prefer to go with one that does not increase taxes at all or wait longer, then you really need to come up with a solution of how you're going to reduce expenses, because it's one or the other.
On that property tax, we make a decision for each year. So every year it comes up whether you want to improve it or not. Well, it's not, it doesn't go on forever unless you approve it every year.
And are we, excuse me, I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure that the public knows we are required by law to have a balanced budget. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So we cannot by law intentionally plan for deficit. And if the reserves are spent, we would have no ability to make up those reserves. Is that correct?
Well, it would be through additional revenue or reducing expenses, but there's always a potential because every year we do have savings from expenses. So those then would, be put back into the reserve. So, probably we'll have extra money each year to add back to the reserves.
Okay, which would be spent the following year.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair Guns,
Yes.
I'll defer to Mr. Ford. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I just want to, frankly, I just want to thank Mr. Onzik. Simplifying this for me is incredibly helpful. Everything that I have read is extremely helpful to me, and I just want to thank you for all the hard work you put into this. And likewise, I really want to thank everybody on this committee for having this tough conversation, because I just feel like, and I kick the can, Teppy, and dance around gums here. I'm just glad we're having this conversation because it's literally part of our job. And I just want to say thank you for doing it.
I would like to thank Madam Chair because she's really the one who put together this spreadsheet. I just contributed some figures, but it's really mostly her work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Definitely. Mr. Ford, you had something.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I'm one who believe in keeping our reserves. I think our reserves over the years have been low. So putting money back into reserve, I definitely believe in. And as our budget get bigger, to be honest with you, our reserves need to be bigger. So I see the need of that we need to come up with different answers. My question is, if we take this route, we gotta have a game plan to sell it. That's what I'm saying. And I'm turning my mic off.
Well, you're right. We do have to have a game plan. And you're also right that we want those reserves when we really need them. Fine, we can solve our problem for a year or maybe 2 years, maybe 2. But
Are we required to have a certain amount in our reserve? I mean, what do you
No.
do? Can you tell? No.
You took your mic off.
Stop turning my mic off. Are we required to have that number, or what is that number?
We're not required to have reserves.
We're not required.
No, I mean, our financial statements require a certain fund balance in the general fund, and that's entirely separate because it's required, we never touch it. So these are additional reserves that are truly at the discretion of the board.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. I think we've,
Compensation equity adjustments.
pardon?
B.
compensation equity, you want to go into human resources?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we started in the morning. Yeah.
It's afternoon now. To discuss company compensation equity adjustments, I do believe you guys have some materials that were sent out regarding equity adjustments. I just want to highlight that these are estimates. They are estimates from all of the non-union staff, which composed 579 staff positions, including the elected offices and the county departments, with the exception of the offices of the ROE and the recorder that when we began stated they were not in need of equity adjustments. So all other non-union positions within the county were included in this analysis. We began originally by looking at McHenry and Lake counties. We fall somewhere in between those two counties, and those were what we asked department heads to review when looking at salary ranges that would be comparable for their staff. In the meantime, while we were working on that, there was a report released by McHenry County that they have done, that they paid for through a consultant. And that analysis included information from multiple counties in Northern Illinois, as well as some municipalities, school districts in their area. It did include DeKalb, DuPage, Cane Lake, Will, Winnebago counties, and then a number of municipalities, McHenry Community College, as well as information from the Economic Research Institute in Chicago. So they did use a very broad range of comparisons when establishing these salary ranges. And they did provide us this information with permission for our use. As I continued to go through the equity adjustments, I did have to go through fairly quickly. So again, these are estimates. I did make an attempt to do a preliminary grade on all of the 579 positions that we have in the county. I did this in a very short time period. These are not 100% accurate. They were done quickly based on title. To actually proceed with this, we would need to actually sit down with the departments and look at the job descriptions for the positions that are associated and see what grade they fell into. So that would include looking at the job description of the position as well as job descriptions of the other positions in the grade to make sure that these jobs are comparable. One of the reasons that we want to do this when we look at equity is for internal equity. As it is right now, each department sets their salary ranges in a silo, looking at their own department's internal equity and not looking at the full county's internal equity. This has resulted in some departments paying on a better scale than other departments, which leaves a situation where we have some employees leaving one department and moving to another where they can get paid better doing the same or less work. The internal turnover just costs the county additional money. So reaching internal equity is important for a number of reasons. Preventing that internal turnover, and as well as making sure we're able to analyze our pay scales and make sure that we are paying an equal opportunity pay range to make sure we are paying everyone who's doing equal work with equal pay. One thing I want to also point out is I do believe that this is something that the county does need to look at now. I think we will be paying these higher rates within the next 3 to 5 years, whether we take action on this now. What inevitably happens is new hires have to come in at market rate. You simply can't hire below market rate. You don't get any applicants. When you bring a new hire in at market rate and you have existing good quality employees that are being paid at a lower rate, you have two choices. You either raise those employees as well, so you would be making those equity adjustments, or leave them where they are. If you leave them where they are, they tend to be displeased when there is a newer person doing the same job, making more money than them, and then they leave. And then you have to replace them with new people who, again, will come in at market rate. So you will probably be paying within the next 3 to 5 years market rate on most positions. It's whether you will have your existing high quality, well-trained senior staff or whether you'll have new people doing that. So I think you will need to be doing this in the next few years, one way or another, but rather than doing it as people leave, if we take this good systematic approach and plan for it and plan it over a couple of years, we're able to do it in a way that's equitable across the county.
Mr. Sturgis.
Jamie, are your numbers built in the Joe spreadsheet?
They are built into that spreadsheet, yes.
Thank you.
If you take a look at the spreadsheet, you'll see safety and under the new position is equity pay raises. Step increases. My mic is not on, am I sorry? Equity step pay raises, year one comes at 691,641. So you can see that it's kind of at the bottom of the first page. And then estimated step increases, which are based on union contracts.
Tepe here, I think in one of our earlier meetings, we got a detailed spreadsheet of the equity pay increases that included this 3-year plan. So,
That the numbers are combined in each one of the years. So 23, 24, and 25 have that out. And Ms. Labrillo suggested, I think that's very wise, is to take the full number to give full equity and so that the county can afford this, to ramp it up over a period of 3 years. So it's over a $2 million cost altogether if we're all in immediately. But for budgeting purposes, we would ramp it up over a period of 3 years.
yeah, but
Vern, that's available to you in detail as long as you understand it's a work in progress and not complete.
I understand it. My point was, I thought it was very well done, and I agreed with the logic associated with it.
Yeah, put one into it.
Could argue percentages here and there, but the logic and the detail associated with it really shows us the issue that we're being faced with by individual position. You know, and sometimes you're looking at $10,000 to $15,000 a year in equity differential, which is why we're losing people to other counties.
And there's one employee who's been here for 20 years and is making under 30,000 a year.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And Mr. Berman, as long as we're on the record, I'll once again say that so much of this stuff was done in-house. We did not use an outside consultant. We had figures that were ranging from $30,000 to $150,000 to do this report. We didn't spend any of that. Jamie did most of it in-house, and the latest information was, we used 2 words. We initially plagiarized it from our good friends at the other county. And now we're using the word, we collaboratively have their permission to use this and add to it as we see fit. And I think it's been a wonderful work product, so.
But we're not going to give them reciprocity, right?
But, you know, and I agree, it's fantastic, and I think it's really appreciated. To me, the 579 employees that we have currently who are underpaid, the idea of getting them to where they should be in their pay structure is as important as the Safety Act is, in my mind. Okay? So I think we need, that has to be our consideration. And that's why I say, you know, our budgets are coming in. I mean, the departments are going to be asking for their budget. And I think that add that to this, we know we've got a real nugget to work on.
But
All right, very good, thank you. Building management. They still. Mr. Feinstock. Capital improvements.
You had our presentation from last time. There were a few minor changes that reflected the capital costs. It was some things that were counted, I think, in duplication from Terry Hunt's work for the State's Attorney's Office. But those are numbers that were basically incorporated into the projections that Mr. Onzik provided. So we're here to answer questions. I mean, those were a variety of numbers that dealt with renovation of office space versus construction of office space for State's Attorney, Public Defender, and Court Services. And then there's also a cost associated with incorporating the circuit clerk in that space as well. So I'd be happy to discuss those. I didn't bring a presentation for that. I think those were incorporated in Joe Onzik's numbers. The renovation of space was, I think, around 6 or 7 million at one point, and we negotiated and worked through the duplication and brought that down a couple $1,000,000. But the cost of construction is where you get into the real costs. I mean, it extends out for just the basic construction of the 50,000 square feet of space approximately that they needed. It was, I mean, nearly $23 million in construction. And then if you go to the extent of adding the court services and the circuit clerk and putting them on the judicial center campus, the number was, I mean, $73 million. So I think those are all just kind of discussion points, but without having much direction. I don't think we wanted to go any further than just estimates based on square footage. So if you have any specific questions or you want us to follow up on something, we'd be happy to do that.
How do we duplicate this room downstairs so we can have committee meetings that aren't backed up waiting for this room? Is that a huge expense, or can we do that for 10,000
You wanna
bucks?
well, I don't know if you can duplicate the staff that are required to do all of that. So Jamie and
hate
I
that he
would have
always
to
has an
be in
answer.
2 rooms same time. We can run back and forth or just appear virtually, I guess, between the two.
A hologram.
Yeah. So, but I think the numbers that you have out there that Joe presented are fairly accurate, short of getting architects and engineers to do what I would say an engineering estimate. They're based on calculated industry numbers.
Madam Chair.
I asked Mr. Onsick, and maybe you can share this with the committee, to keep our capital expenses or build out as low as possible. I asked you, how many employees could we fit into comfortably into that office? And you said 20, 10, how many?
In the judicial center building, I mean, the state's attorney's office, I think would be difficult to put 10 to 20 people in there with renovation of the existing space. I know they were talking about accommodating like the first year. And I believe they had 40 some people in the first
49,
year
49.
for all the offices. I think that was
For
everybody
the state's
combined.
attorney, it's 19.
Yeah. And I think that would be a challenge in the existing space. You might be able to do it. You would be reducing existing office space. Most people look at office space as a 150 square foot per person. And in order to, you'd be going below that. So, and that's also a common guideline for office space, given the current, social distancing and space requirements. So imagine, a 10 by 15 space, you're talking about putting 2 people in it. So they each get half, or I guess if one person is more busier or more important, they get more than half. I don't know. You divide it up. But we do have a challenge in renovating existing space because you're putting more density in the office space that's already got a lot of density. And then how do you handle all the heating and cooling and fire suppression and different common space goes away. There is no, there becomes no common space for doing training or other types of things. It just all becomes desks and offices and storage instead of that. And they've kind of struggled with that in the last few years, going from having lots of file storage and lots of storage to we've managed to digitize a lot of that and give them some moderate meeting spaces and kind of common areas. And now they're talking about basically taking all that away and making it offices again because they need to add people. And then we have the people that are from the diversion program that are occupying the building management space in the new multipurpose building. And we'd like to try and find a home for them. I know we've worked with Circuit Clerk Barrero and State's Attorney Mosser to try and accommodate that. I think that's about 10 people that we're still looking for a permanent or semi-permanent home for them that we need to renovate and construct. But then you talk about 10 people and you look at the $30,000 for renovation, office furniture, and changing the space for 10 people. and it adds up to, $300,000. Can you do it for less than that? Okay, how many corners do you cut to get it less than $300,000 for 10 people, renovated office space that is at a standard that you would expect? We're not even talking about going back in the, retrofitting for ADA or other issues. This is just office space to get people into it. If you want to go the next step further, you're looking at how do you make it, compliant restrooms and other things. And, you can only share so much. And then eventually you're going to have to do some things that are relatively expensive. So.
Deputy Head.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe that it's within the purview of this committee to use the estimates associated with what Mr. Feinstock is saying, but it's not within our purview to come up and say this is
Okay,
what the
that's fine.
county should do or something of that nature.
Sure.
That's up to the county board to work on, not up to us.
Yes.
Okay. Have we exhausted today's?
No, I have one more item, sir.
Okay.
Okay. I believe that it's not within the purview of this committee to look at new positions needed for the county. I do not think that that is what this committee should be doing. So the topic of code enforcement, a county administrator, an assistant county administrator, an additional person for the state's attorney, I do not believe that's part of what we should be advocating, and I certainly will not put my name associated with those particular items as a recommendation. So I think they should be removed.
Why so?
Why?
Why?
Why are we authorizing or suggesting that we should have a county administrator?
And I don't believe that we are. We're suggesting these are the
But
numbers.
we're putting it in the budget.
No, no.
And
no,
we're
no.
definitely it's there. We're putting it in there and saying it's there.
That's in this discussion. It's not the budget that's going to come from the finance committee
No,
necessarily.
But it's not something that should come from an ad hoc committee.
Well,
nor should then equity raises. I mean, all of that can be eliminated. Equity raises are not part of the Safety Act, only as it reflects to the fact that there'd be new employees coming in who would be at market rate versus our standard employees, or regular employees, existing employees who are not at market rate, some of them.
Yeah, I can see from a logical viewpoint that belongs in here because that's an issue that would have to be dealt with the budget. New personnel is an issue that would have to be dealt with by the full county board, not by an ad hoc committee.
Correct, but you're making
I think
recommendations
one of our
for a
One of the
property
things we wanted
tax
to accomplish
increase.
though was to, for everyone to understand what the requirements are, not just on the Safety Act. I think that we want to look at things before we get the budget request from the department. So I don't know if I agree with you.
Yeah, Vern, I'm viewing this just as I need to understand the totality because I don't know how to move forward suggesting this amount of that tax increase or layering a new sales tax only to then get to the finance committee or the exec committee and have them increase that by some additional figure as it creeps up the committee structure. I was under
But
the
the sub-
assumption we were trying to do that here so that we're looking at it as a whole package, and I may have been mistaken on that.
But the subject of a county administrator is not for an ad hoc committee. That's for the,
And I understand that.
your
perspective,
committee
but-
on personnel, but, and, the entire board or the executive committee. I don't think it should be under our purview. So that's why I don't feel that these
Okay.
numbers should be in here.
And just, I would rather work from the total and pull them out as we go along than add them in and wind up short. And I'm not disagreeing or agreeing, same
I
methodology, different methodologies to get the same place. So that's just me.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm just wondering if he wants to see
Phone
what,
back on.
I know, I couldn't help it. I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. I don't know how that happened, but it came back on.
Minute rule. That's
I wonder if what you want to see is just that, keep it in there, but show separately what the impact is for the Safety Act, since that's the priority that we have to follow by, because it's it's not something that we have any other choice on.
But there's so many scenarios that we could,
I'm just asking the question. Is that what?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, okay, and I unfortunately never turn my mic off.
So
But I can see the logic of us dealing with the Safety Act, the step increases, the employee cost of living, and the equity pay raises. It's additional personnel that I don't feel belong as a purview of this committee.
So for a simple math equation, if we kept it in and you want to reduce it by 1.5 million over a period of 3 years, $500,000 a year. So
That's
you
a
could-
start.
Well, no, but it's going to go, some of that will go back in. And some of that is included the 7 people that was just approved of by the board.
Which,
And that hire is at 217 this year, 700,000 base salary plus, I'm going to put $1 million in there because we've got benefits. So that number is not included in here, but it's going to be forecasted out with state's attorney's budget for next year and then the following year. So these are just known, or are they already in there, Joe?
Oh, he stood up.
Yes,
Oh,
tho-
They're already,
those,
they're already in there.
well, those are.
So, but these have not gone, these are still suggested. So for your math equation, if it comes to a very sensitive budget, and we're just talking about numbers, just reduce it by 500,000. And if we can balance the budget without raising any taxes by $500,000 deduction, hallelujah. Hallelujah. So I don't think this is a political discussion, it's a math equation.
We
So-
choose to disagree.
I'm exhausted. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, I need to leave at 2, so I'm,
oh, keep him to about.
Oh, that means we got 6 more minutes.
I got 6 minutes and I'm out.
You're the reason we're so late anyway.
Yeah, stop that.
Exactly. Keep him to 20.
Do we have anything else?
Mr. Chair, I ask for unanimous motion to put reports on file.
No reports to put on. There's no report.
So we're ready to leave?
Motion to adjourn.
That should be Mr. Surgeon.
Well,
Adjourn, second, all in favor, say aye.
Oh, wait a minute, hold on.
Madam Chair.
Before we dismiss this committee, does everyone know what their task is for next week? Because next week,
We got to make a
you
decision.
got to make a decision, please.
I think we should just bring a dartboard in here. and set it up.
You want, and let me know, do you want me to draw by the hat? And, just, there are a couple of options and we'll have 3 options and, no tax, sales tax.
We could, but we can't. We
Just-
just gotta see what we can come up with. Jamie, can you make sure that everybody gets this report? Because it was good.
So, all right, decision next week.
Sturgis and Ford.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.